Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Alan Greenfield. He was a world traveler and teen ufologist by age 16 and has done numerous field investigations of UFO and paranormal phenomena. He was founder of the longest-running UFO annual convention, the National UFO Conference, and was twice honored with their Ufologist of the Year award. He has also been an active occultist since the 1960s and was featured also on the Hellier 2 TV series recently and experienced many synchronicities related to this, as reportedly have many others. He has written a number of books and monographs, including the current best-selling The Complete Secret Cipher of the Euphenots, which explains how to correctly understand UFO, cryptid, paranormal, mystical, and magical events as different aspects of one phenomena. Alan, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Considering that we're in the middle of a pandemic and whatever else is going on, riots in the street, I'm doing just fine. But I'm at home, you know. So.
Well, yeah, that's good. Considering everything, I'm doing pretty good myself. Before we get too far, I do want to thank C60 Purple Power, our sponsor. I've been taking C60 for almost a month. I really feel amazing. I have increased energy. I have so much better sleep, less aches and pains. I feel great. C60 it may be the most powerful antioxidant yet known. Not only can it help maximize the efficiency of cells in producing energy, but it may also provide cellular protection against many toxic environmental factors. It also helps reduce inflammation in the body by neutralizing oxidative radicals. Take back control of your health and begin your C60 Purple Power journey today. Visit c60purplepower.com/knowledge10 to receive 10% off your order plus free shipping, or just click the link in the description. Now, Alan, I have been looking forward to tonight. I want to pick your brain. You're one of my favorite kind of researchers, one that can connect UFOs with the paranormal, occult, cryptids, and even magical events. Tonight, I can't wait to get into it regarding these connections. I want to see how deep we can get. First, I want to start with how you got involved with the occult studies and ufology. I know it was at a young age, right?
Very young, yeah. As an active thing, I got involved in the early 1960s, and it was a combination of things. One is I saw what at the time I thought was a UFO. I now do not believe that it was. I believe it was two high-flying jets, but that doesn't matter. It happens synchronistically. A big part of my work now, that I had just read the first article I had ever read about UFO organizations, in this case, NICAP in 1536 Connecticut Avenue, Washington, D.C., as it was then. And so I sent them a report, and they said, oh, that's good, join us, and send your $10 in, or whatever it was back then. More money than would be now. So I joined NICAP. Same year, I don't remember whether they reached out to me or I reached out to them, but I joined the Mystic Arts Book Society, which was an eclectic thing. They, under the label University Books, anything that wasn't esoteric, they published. So I got an education in esoterica of all sorts, from A.E. Waite to Aleister Crowley, all the way back to the early 1960s. The other areas, I don't know where the interest came from. I cut my teeth on stories, local stories of ghosts and goblins and other nefarious creatures. And in the end, I would say that it's those coincidings of events, or synchronicities, I think is a probably more accurate thing, that got me interested. But at that time, if you had asked me what my opinions were, they would have been much more conventional than the radical views that I hold now, and that I have held for the last 30 years.
And when did you get involved with organized magic and the OTO?
I was involved with the OTO? Oh no, those people are nuts. That was a lot later. what I did, but prior to getting involved with it, and I can see your questions are going to be right to the point. Okay. Fearless fellow. Okay. Basically, the woman I was then married to joined the caliphate, or corporate, as I prefer to call it, OTO, and I got asked to organize their local Ecclesia Gnostica group. I don't know why. Maybe she just recommended me because I had a lot of experience organizing UFO conventions and science fiction conventions and other things that were along those lines. So I was asked, and I remember saying to the then camp master, I said, look, you probably have one kind of agenda and I have another, but as long as you understand that, I'm willing to work with you. From that, somewhere along the line, I got made an ecclesiastical member of the OTO, even though I wasn't a member of the OTO. So somewhere around 1984, 83, somewhere in there, I thought, well, they don't have to do this. They actually have an affiliate program, so maybe I should join as an initiate member. My previous experience with initiation consisted of the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, which isn't very big on ritual and certainly isn't an occult organization, although the Masonic descent is there, descent from. And in fact, they used to have rituals in the 19th century, but they grew up. Other than that, the Boy Scouts. I was a Boy Scout, and I was senior patrol leader of my Boy Scout troop. So that was it. And they asked me, you know, what other occult organizations are you in? I said, well, there's AZA. What's that? Aleph Tzedek Aleph. It's the kids in the Jewish Community Center. And what else? The BSA. BSA? Is that like Borderland Sciences? No, but if you sing a few bars, I'll be glad to help you out. Okay, that's the Boy Scouts of America. Up till now, I have never joined anything of this sort. So here I am. And
very good.
Being 20-year involvement, which taught me a lot of negative lessons, but very little positive.
Wow, that's understandable from, you know, some of the things I've heard from people who have been involved with the organizations. Now, so many researchers like to put these categories in different boxes. Ufology, if they're ufologists, they're sticking to nuts and bolts UFOs. These craft are coming from across different galaxies to visit us. Or if you're into the occult, that these are, you know, angelic beings. But very few can piece these together. When did you start connecting the profound connections between ufology and the occult and magic?
Well, it started with a question, and it was fairly early on, because I think if someone had asked me in 1963, when I was getting involved in what was then called the teen ufology movement, I would have said, oh yeah, there's ships coming from Mars. That was conventional wisdom back then. Then it moved out to the stars as Mars became sort of, you know, just not quite plausible, except to people who keep seeing, you know, critters on the surface of Mars. And maybe there are, I don't know, but I doubt that there are sophisticated civilizations there. We do not have a John Carter of Mars scenario. Anyway, I asked myself a question that I don't think anyone at that time had asked. And it was just to myself. I didn't say it to anybody else at that point. But somewhere in the mid-1960s, I began to do radio programs on Ted Turner's first station, WCNN, WTLK, and the local rock and roll station, WQXI. They had a talk show. So, you know, it went all the way back. And they would ask me, you know, why do you think that they are spaceships from another planet? And I would give some kind of answer, I guess, well, we're doing space probes now with our stolen German V2 rockets, so why not go that way? But a shadow person just passed behind you, by the way, but don't worry about it. Yeah, okay. So I didn't really have a good reason to think that they were from space. And I looked around me and everybody else that was involved in ufology. That was the default position. Either they were secret weapons or misidentified natural phenomena, or they were spaceships from another world who came to visit us with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, as they used to say on the original Superman series. No, the riddle that I came up with was, why on earth, in 1947, when the Kenneth Arnold case and the so-called Roswell case and the much more interesting and coinciding case in Portland involving an object that dropped materials and otherwise killed a dog, might have killed the man if it hit him, and the two Air Force officers, the Air Force was then a new institution apart from the Army Air Force, they came and interviewed these guys, and when on their flight back home, they had a wreck and were killed, thus being the Air Force's first casualties. So seems like a strange coincidence, but nothing was said other than, oh, little green men, flying saucers from outer space, blah, 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 blah. Oh, but other people would say, au contraire, they are in fact something that the government is generating to conceal their, I'm sure you've heard this one, to conceal their secret programs of, developing the flying wing or whatever was current in the late 1940s. Or it's war nerves. People are just getting over World War II. I actually had an experience as a 3 or 4-year-old child where I was, there was no pandemic at the time. So I was waiting in the Atlantic Ocean, and we saw a contrail, not a chemtrail, a contrail going straight up in the sky. And I thought, that's one of the new jets. And I heard a child further down the beach going, there goes a soul ascending into heaven. I should have gotten the point right there in 1950 or 49 or whatever year it was. My family went every year. But much later, it occurred to me, there is a really big disjointed leap, because all UFOs are either seen on the Earth or near the Earth. All UFO communications are on the Earth or near the Earth. The only exceptions are stories by contactees and later abductees who sometimes claim to have gone elsewhere, although they really don't know. They're not astronauts or cosmonauts. They don't have the ability to know. And they're usually inside a structure and usually having a thing on, oh, where am I? And any answers they might have gotten from the alien beings would have been debatable, because if you've been abducted by someone and they say, oh, you're in St. Louis in a hotel, you're probably not in St. Louis and probably not in a hotel unless they're planning to kill you. And most abductees are returned eventually. So why in 1947 would there be this leap to, well, we don't know what they are, so they must be from other planets? And I started to question that, and I groped my way without any good theoretical basis at that time to the notion that maybe they're from here in some sense, from another dimensional plane, or, the terminology is very unscientific. But as it turns out, in the wonderful world of theoretical physics, they were beginning to develop the notion of many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And if that interpretation or some variant of it is correct, then where you sit right now and where I sit right now, we are this close to other dimensions. It's just a question of, because they are, even though we're dimensions, they prefer the term brains, but you have to spell it B-R-A-N-E-S. It's not the thing in here. It's other universes, but they may have entirely different laws of physics or no laws of physics as we understand the term. And sometimes there's a glitch in the matrix and we see apparitions, whichever phenomena you want to go to, or we have a telepathic experience, or this or that, whatever. But when I tried that out on the ufologists, they said, oh no, we don't want to get involved in that kind of stuff. So I tried it out on the occultists. I mean, I'm condensing in time here from the 1960s to the late 1980s, but each one of these areas had this turf sensibility, a kind of tribalism. And what I was saying was, why are these things not being connected? They seem to have been around, before there was any government. They've been around since people have been around, if you judge from, cave paintings and the most ancient stories that we have. So there have been goblins and fairy stories. And actually, at that time, the only person in ufology that was willing to entertain that was Jacques Vallée. I thought he did a very good job. But, I didn't take my inspiration from him. I started publishing a thing called Alternate Horizons newsletter, which is pretty much what the name sounds like. And I started to try to persuade people to look in these other areas. Well, I might as well have gone from one biker gang to another and say, hey, why don't you guys get together and we'll have a love fest. And then after both of them beat the hell out of me, I would go, maybe I ought to take a different approach. I remember one time the U.S. Grand Master of the OTO, I was at his home, and we were alone at the time, and I said, look, this is very much like paranormal phenomena, what we're generating or profess to be generating, that we call magic or initiation or whatever. So why don't we use the same methods that are used in parapsychology? I spent a year or so in the as an elected member of the Society for Psychical Research, so I knew the routines, and I've kept up with that. And I'm very big into the notion of repeatable tests and also verification, and also try to avoid people who are cheating, whatever. I went on for about an hour, as I'm doing right now, to the supreme and most holy king of the United States, to which I said, I thought we had a revolution here, no kings. Oh, you don't understand, it's spiritual. Okay. So I went on, and I was really good. I was in, I was in the zone. And he listens politely, as he is prone to do, old Dave. And nothing. He says, that's very interesting. And I thought, he'll do nothing with this. There aren't going to be any tests before the initiation and after the initiation and a year later follow-up. It isn't going to happen because these people are not interested in that. And then when I published the first book that linked the occult to UFOs, an early version of the complete secret cipher, the Euphenots, which is, thanks to the Hellier people, I think, selling off the shelves, right? Well, you can't even say that anymore. It's selling off of the Amazon and the Barnes and Noble and the other non-brick and mortar places. I don't know how it's doing in whatever bookstores are left after the pandemic. Maybe none, sadly.
Yes, I've come across this term from a few of my researchers friends and some things that I've come across, the super spectrum. I think that's a great way to describe the world beyond our vision, just beyond the spectrum of our vision. And he also calls these beings ultra terrestrials, which is another interesting term I like. Would you think it's fair to say that these entities are essentially the same thing as angels or other etheric beings?
Well, I don't claim to know, but I think they follow the same kind of pattern. They approach their relationship with us is very similar, maybe even the same. How we apprehended it, think about it for a minute. We, in terms of biological time, we've been here for about, 15 minutes. And we have these five senses that are basically meant to allow us to find food, to kill the prey, but not be killed by the predator, to reproduce, and that's it. That's what eyes and ears, and that's what we're able to see with our own, able to, what's the term? To cognitively resolve in a way that is satisfactory to us. And that's just ill-equipped. I mean, astronauts have problems with just, going a couple of 100 miles up in space, not to trivialize that, but they say people are changed by that. And I don't dispute that at all. If we're dealing with something that has physical rules that are totally different from what we understand and what we've evolved in the 2 minutes that we've been here, to say nothing of the time the planet has been here, to say nothing of the time the universe has been here. We're newcomers here, and the notion that we can label these things in anything other than a good mythos that we can work with is probably a mistake. So I don't have a term, but ultra-terrestrial will do, as long as you understand that that's a provisional term too. And by the way, the term comes from my old buddy, the late John Keel. He, we
Sure,
were,
yes.
I wouldn't call him a buddy. Gray Barker was a buddy. John Keel was a strange dude. Or as Jerome Clark once put it, I don't think he would mind my quoting, if anybody in this field is one of them, it's Keel. Yeah.
Yeah, possibly so.
He went back to his home dimension, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to visit my home dimension someday.
Well,
Now, from Crowley to John Dee, to many other occultists throughout history that have made a form of contact, it seems a recurring theme is the conveyance of a sort of coded language. Is this something that you've come across in your theory, in your research?
I certainly hope so, because that's like the linchpin, the pillar of my point of view. I'll tell you the story of the secret cipher of the Euphenots. I guess that's a plug, but it's actually, I don't know what else to call it. There was this little group of occultists in England that published a magazine called the New Equinox. Jim Lees was kind of the closest thing to a guru that they had on. Well, I was going to say Crowley's book, the Book of the Law, Liber Vel Legis, but Crowley did not claim it was his book. He claimed it was dictated to him by a praeter-human intelligence named Aiwass. That is as it may be. I don't know why he talked in King James biblicalese if he was a praeter-human intelligence from another plane of existence, but be that as it may, there are indications in Liber Al that there is a cipher that Crowley would never be able to crack. In fact, he attempted to over and over and over and did not happen. So Jim Lees went on this magical retreat in I guess it was the mid-1970s. I may be doing that wrong. Came back to his group and he said, I have cracked the cipher. There's a page in Liberal that someone, perhaps Crowley's first wife, perhaps someone else, had drawn a grid over and tried to decipher the page where it says, this is where you'll find the cipher. I'm reducing that, and the hardcore Crowleyites will go, Greenfield, that's so typical of him. But I don't care that, I think the Liberal should be subjected to the same sort of thing that biblical criticism, higher criticism does. It's appropriate to take a closer look at anything that claims to be divine or sort of divine or whatever, not because it might not be, but because it might be. And the only way to find out is to, play with it, work with it, whatever. Lees comes back with this, what became known as the Azure Lidded Woman Cipher, which then was picked up in America by the late William Wallace Webb, who I became aware of just when the World Wide Web was coming around. So it was like www does www, but he was the head of a little group called the QBLH, the Kabbalistic Alchemist Church, although he was the least churchy person I've ever met. And he promoted this same cipher, but it was always done with occult matters. In other words, there are a lot of things called barbarous names in occultism. And you could decipher these, or you could decipher secondary meanings in Liberal using it. And one of Webb's American followers was this early computer genius named Tim Couttet. Complicated person, eventually committed suicide. I always say too good for this world, really, or this world wasn't, up to maintaining a person of that kind of vision. But Couttet presented this cipher to me as something to use with occultism. Well, by that time, this is late 1980s, I had been wrestling already with, do I really want to be part of an organization that has a crypto-fascist edge, or do I not want to be part of it? Well, I went on for another 15 years, so obviously it either has cultic attraction or I'm just lazy, whatever. But maybe some of both, and maybe they count on that. But as I rose through the ranks there, I thought, well, this is nice. It really does decode a lot of the occult terms that are obscure. So what? I'm sort of disillusioned. And as I'm being presented with this computer program called Lexicon, which my publisher, not coincidentally, has sort of revived, I had to tell all of the non-technical details of how the program worked, because I had clueless on, I turn the machine on, and if it doesn't go on, I look at the plug, and if it's plugged in, that's as much as my knowledge is going to do. I can sit here and pontificate, but I know nothing about the structure of what's allowing us to communicate in this way. And in truth, I don't much care. It's what is. And in any case, I used it for a few occult terms, and it worked very well because this program, Lexicon, was fabulous. It had been designed on a mainframe computer back when mainframes were really the only way to do anything really complex. I don't know what language it was originally in, but probably something like COBOL, one of those almost lost computer languages that were used by the government mostly. And I thought, well, this works. But do I really want to devote a lot of time to decoding occultism when I'm wrestling with whether I should, walk away from that particular aspect of things or become an independent critic, as I naively thought I could without getting kicked out, or wrong. So, for lack of anything else to do, having this program and the guy who was a genius saying, try it, keep trying it. You'll really, this is really something. Jim Lees, Carol Smith, the people in England, blah, blah, blah. Bill Webb says it's great, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, well, why don't I try applying this to some of the other fields that I'm interested in? For example, in many, especially earlier UFO-related close encounter cases, either there was a term given to the percipient, to use Keel's term, or a planetary name that was nonsensical, even silly, or if it was a trans-channel thing, you would have, you know, Maharaja Nacha is literally one of the names. Why don't I apply this to the what I call the silly names that have shown up in UFO lore instead of to just occult lore, and see if it produces anything. And I tried it. I don't remember what particular word. I think it was orthon, because orthon has some of the values I'm interested in terms of being a contactee claim that nevertheless sounds very much like mythology. And I take mythology in the Joseph Campbell's, Carl Jung sense as being not the equivalent of fraud or superstition, but as being sort of an inner truth. So I tried it on orthon, and it yielded the same value as the name Jesus. And I thought, well, orthon, in the way Jesus is depicted in Western lore, is this blonde, blue-eyed, you're familiar with the old pictures. I don't think they're as popular now because they're absurd for a Jewish gentleman living in Galilee in the circa 30 CE. That's just not acceptable anymore. But it was then, and that's the way orthon was depicted. And not only that, but the guy depicting it was George Adamski, who I knew from my friend Jim Mosley was privately a very anti-Semitic person, who was one of his primary witnesses was George Hunt Williamson, who had been part of a group of people just prior to World War II, associated with William Dudley Pelley, who was the head of the Silver Shirts, a neo-Nazi group in the United States. Pelley was in fact imprisoned after World War II broke out here. So I thought, well, so they see a blonde, blue-eyed alien, and it has the same numerical equivalence in this code that was written 60 years before of Jesus. What are they trying to suggest? That this is the Aryan Jesus? I mean, the point is, I got it, that this cipher or code had far wider applications. And the more I tried, the more I was convinced. In fact, I reached a point where I thought, well, if I publish a book about this, probably the cipher will be changed by whoever has generated it, whether it's a being called Iwas or Fred Schmutz from New Jersey. Whoever generated it, once it's exposed, it's going to change. But it needs to be out there because people need to test this. And I think you can use it if there's a particular close encounter case where a word for a planet or word for a name like Indrid Cold, which figures prominently in the Hellier excellent field work, then you can probably predict when the next big event will happen by decoding that name, because the name is probably not the personal name of that entity or whatever it may be. It's meant to get in the media so that the message, it's a perfect coding system. The message goes without any direct contact to whoever or whatever it's supposed to go to. And if you intercept that, you will know where the next time there's going to be a really important UFO-related event is going to be such and such. So I came out with the first version of Secret Cipher, the Euphenots, and wrote the sequel at the same time. I went down to my hometown, which is out in the central Savannah River area, right across from where they were making the triggers for the nuclear bombs, as they would say there. And a lot of UFO sightings around there, which is interesting. In fact, I have a person monitoring that right now because it's always going on in that area. I don't think it has anything to do with secret weapons. I think it has to do with interest in what used to be done there. So I wrote a sequel called Secret Rituals of the Men in Black. And my publisher at that time, Illuminate Press, which fell apart under very mysterious circumstances, they bought the second book. And then I went to visit the Grand Master of the corporate OTO at his home, which was then in North Carolina. I mean, I'm not trying, he's a very paranoid person, and I don't want to out him or anything, but he's not there anymore, so don't go looking for him in North Carolina. But anyway, he hit me up with something totally unexpected. I knew that the organization was, I was like, this goes back a ways, the fair-haired boy. You know, I was considered to be, as he put it, potentially the historian of the movement, because I could write, which most people in that organization, you know, putting 3 words together is, they're very stilted and whatever. There are a couple of exceptions, but only a couple. So out of the blue, this is right after the original Illuminate Press edition of Secret Cipher came out. He launches into this, we're alone together, this long tirade, not raised voice or anything, but basically saying, you know, you could have gone a long way in the OTO if you'd stayed away from this UFO stuff, because the occult is far more respectable than UFOs. I didn't know that A, respectability is what it's all about. I thought truth was what it was all about. And B, where have you been? On what planetary system do you think that the occult is more respectable than ufology? Because it just isn't true. But he was the, you know, he was the boss, the high guru. So I talked him into coming back to Atlanta with me. This is after I had, you know, I was somewhat in the upper middle echelon of the OTO, and I wanted him to initiate a friend of mine who had been neglected by others. So he drove me back to Atlanta. When we were passing Tallulah Gorge, which is a legendary place, it's where the movie Deliverance. Yeah, that's where it was filmed. It's supposed to be on the Wild Catoosa. Instead, it's in Tallulah Gorge. But Tallulah Gorge is a place where the little people are supposed to live. And my erstwhile friend Terry said that there was an entrance to Otherwhere there, which seemed to dovetail with the Indian story. So I've looked for that with no success, and not sure I would go in if I found it. So because the experiences I've heard are pretty ghastly, really. Anyway, we're passing Tallulah Gorge where the road gets narrow, and I'm with this guy, and he's playing a demo tape with the band Psychic TV that he jammed with sometimes, and and Psychic TV is not exactly the respectable group. It was affiliated with one of the more nefarious magical organizations, and was a pretty bizarre situation itself. But then he starts again. I'm a captive audience, and he says, "You know, you were considered for a Grand Lodge office, but we had to pass you up because you did that UFO book." And I said, "Well, there's a sequel." And he said, "You shouldn't publish any more of this." And I thought, yeah, I should publish a volume on the censorship from from the boss of the OTO. But instead I said something to the effect of, "Are you telling me, as the Grand Commander of the order that I am pledged to, not to publish the second book?" Click, I turned on the tape recorder. He said, "No, I am not, blah, 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 blah." He backed off a little bit there. But for the next 10 years, I bought back the rights to the second book. I a couple of times wanted to publish it, but at that time I wanted to get ahead in the OTO. So I wanted to play ball with the OTO game, and from the highest source they have in the material universe, was told, "Don't do that or you will not advance," so to speak. And I did advance, didn't publish the book until I hadn't quite quit my jobs in the OTO, but I was up there and was a dues exempt member, blah, blah, blah. But I was done with it. I was done with it long before I quit, because they made me a sheriff, that's Sovereign Grand Inspector General, and it happened that one of our local members had she was Delta security right after 9/11, so she had this pass for Delta flights. So I flew all over the country and inspected all these various lodges and decided, this is not something, I have wasted these 15 years. I'm not going to waste any more on this. I'm going to resign from my positions, talk to the people in charge in person, and quit. It didn't go that smoothly, but that's where my head was at that point. I kind of forced them to throw me out after I had quit all my jobs, and then they accused me of abandoning ship. I said, well, if I abandoned ship, I don't know. It was like I gave you a year's advance notice that I was resigning from all these positions. You had plenty of time to replace me if you had anybody who was, shall we say, more compliant than me. So the second book came out. But in the meantime, several of the authors for this in the same stable that I was in, among them Jim Keith, friend of mine, and the publisher of Illuminate Press, Ron Bonds, who I had known back to the BBS days, died under mysterious circumstances. Kerry Thornley, a friend of mine, I got a great interview with him that is now apparently a book. Somebody turned it into a book, and it's online if anybody's curious about it. But they all died relatively young and under really screwy circumstances. The screwiest of all was Ron Bonds, because he supposedly died of food poisoning that he'd gotten at a local restaurant, but he was dead by morning. And I've consulted any number of people who said that does, food poisoning does do that. And she's still alive, and as far as I know, and other people in the restaurant, nobody reportedly was sick. He was poisoned, and I don't know with what, I don't know why exactly, but it ended Illuminate Press, because he was the fulcrum from which all of these people were. They were a very responsible press, one of the old school presses that did contracts and gave you 10% and gave you review copies to give to your friends or the hosts of radio programs so they could read it and sound. That doesn't much exist anymore, except for Stephen King. That's gone with the wind, which is gone with the wind.
Now, when it comes to these magical orders and some of these secret society, especially when we're talking about higher level ranking members, how much would you say do they really understand about the nature of reality and these, occult phenomenon in ufology? And also, how much power and control do they really have over society? We all hear these theories and that they actually control the world and they control the banks and they control everything in some of these higher orders of secret societies. What are your thoughts on that?
There was a book some years ago called Blood on the Altar by a guy who has since become a friend of mine and done much better books. But he postulated in this book, which he said was heavily edited when I wrote him, and said, essentially, look, you see in these orders some kind of grand conspiracy. The truth is, I know people in the OTO up to the highest level that there is and down to the lowest level. There's no correspondence between, there are people who are coming in at the Minerval or first degree level and people who are in the exalted, ninth degree and 12th degree and other things that they sort of make up as they go along, I think. And there's no correspondence between the level of their initiation and the level of their actual initiation. There are dumb people at the top, dumber than posts. There are a few people who are competent in the day-to-day world, although most of them are marginalized people in society, which is interesting in and of itself. Degree-hungry people. And there are people at the bottom who come in looking for the great, the great conspiracy or the great knowledge or whichever side of it they think that they're on, that know far more than the people in the upper reaches of this organization. I have the same issue with people who think that UFOs are a government conspiracy and they know everything. And I always say, and I don't mean this in any kind of egotistical way, because it would apply to anybody who's been at this for a long time, I probably know more about UFOs than the government does, period. It's just, Project Blue Book was like 2 guys in the office and a secretary. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize it. That's literally what it was. And they'd sign the work out to competent field investigators, but it was them making the decisions, and they didn't know, not a single one of them, what they were about. They were chasing balloons, and on the one hand, and they were chasing hypothetical flying saucers on the other hand, and wanting to tamp that down because they'd been told to by the CIA for actually rather good reasons, which is a long story in and of itself, and I doubt that we have time for it. But I got that straight from their Pentagon monitor, Dewey Fournay, and they were absolutely terrified back in the Red Scare days. So in any case, there was a long pause, and then when I reached the I don't give a damn phase of my OTO membership, the second book got published, but they were separate books. They're still available as separate books from Paranoia Publishing, but Paranoia Publishing and Paranoid approached me about 3 years ago and said, what about a combined edition of called the Complete Secret Cipher, the Euphenots? And I said, I don't know that it will sell very much. It's been out there for a long time. Well, it's selling like hotcakes, and it's a lot cheaper than buying separate books. And it basically tells you how to get to the core, to the extent human beings can get to the core of the UFO mystery and a lot of other things.
And that brings me perfectly to what I want to talk about: the secret rituals of the Men in Black. Now, first, give us what are the Men in Black based on your research, and how far back do they go?
They go back at least to medieval times, because there are medieval stories where the men or man in black was thought to be the devil. And we're talking about the same time that someone who was a community healer would be burned at the stake as a witch. So, you know, consider the times in which these stories emerged. Nevertheless, when you strip it down to the bare bones of the story of the men in black or the man in black in the Middle Ages is the same core story as you get from the typical story, and actually the archetypical story is that of Albert K. Bender, who it turns out, I believe I was the one to realize this, although probably Gray Barker knew it at the time he wrote They Knew Too Much About the Flying Saucers. He was a ceremonial magician. In the 1950s, believe me, sir, that was rare. That was very, very rare. When I got involved, to get books, I had to, living in Atlanta, I had to get my books from Haslam's bookstore in St. Petersburg, Florida, and Samuel Weiser in New York, or I didn't get them. You asked about the occult, they gave you, locally, the local bookstores would give you a book on astrology. I mean, that was it, you know, that was their radical fringe. So it was rarer than hen's teeth, as we used to say. And Bender started the first private UFO organization, but he was interested, he had eclectic interests. For a person of his time, he had very eclectic interests. He was a science fiction fan. He was, and that was incorporated into his magazine, even though it was nominally a flying saucer publication. In his personal life, he certainly incorporated the occult. I didn't fully realize that until I saw an obscure picture of his Chamber of Horrors, as he called it, somewhat facetiously. But there's an altar there, a magical altar. So it's clear that he summoned the Men in Black. They came to him, and they were more, the three Men in Black as they were known then, more than he had bargained for. But they gave him a talisman that had a name, a calling name, which works in the cipher. The name is pronounced Kazik, but it's spelled K-A-Z-I-K. I don't know why he knows how it was spelled, if it was just verbal, but they gave him this disc and said, press this disc and say the word anytime you want to be in touch with us, and turn your radio between stations, which is a little bit like one of the occult methods that's being used for communicating with otherwhere. Bender may have been a victim of this CIA program, but my guess is he conjured these beings up and got more than he bargained for, which in 1952-53 I expect that he would have, and got completely out of the field, but not without telling other people. He was a World War II vet. He was alive until about 2 years ago, and had moved to the West Coast, from where I think he was from Bridgeport, Connecticut, if memory serves, and got Gray Barker his only best-selling book. Gray was a very close friend of mine, and I think probably the person most on top of the Mothman, original Mothman stories. There's a whole new set now. He became involved with the orchestra in Los Angeles, and was known for that. His obituaries don't even mention his encounter with the Men in Black and his founding the first flying saucer organization. Al Bender was known as a vet, and rightly so. We are losing those all too quickly. And as a patron of the Philharmonic Orchestra in the town that he lived in, which I didn't know until I read the obituaries and the tributes that local people had. He lived a different life altogether after that. And that's not unusual in the occult field. People will get in too deep and are too deep for them, ill prepared, not having, done meditation and protective stuff that they need to do, and perhaps, as Israel Regardie recommended, 300 hours of psychotherapy minimum, and they freak. And if they freak and walk away, it's the same thing as people that get disillusioned and walk away, which I think is the greatest crime of the major occult organizations. They're top heavy, and that tends to work badly. Works bad in countries, works bad in organizations, especially if their aspiration is towards enlightenment.
How do you think these Men in Black entities are connected to modern day Men in Black encounters, like the guys with the suits and look like they're from some 3-letter agency?
Yeah, I think that what happens in a lot of these things, one of my favorite expressions is I say there are no hoaxes. And I base that on the fact that I think reality is far more malleable, pliable, lasting than we like to think that it is. We like to think that floor under our feet is firm and the world we live in is a solid place. It's a passing shadow in the night. And it's more like the world of the Matrix than it is like the real world, as it says in the original film. I think there are two fundamental things going on with the Men in Black. One is the original, which I sort of mentioned. That is cases like Bender's, where they're invoked, or someone who is a UFO witness, maybe a close encounter 2 witness, or even a significant light in the sky appearance, will then have a visit from something that the shorthand is Men in Black. They don't always wear black. They're not always 3. Sometimes it's 1. Keel has a case that he documented in New Jersey that was one guy who they nicknamed Tiny because he was this hugely oversized guy, not that I have any right to talk, and who apparently was not a real human being. He was, when he walked out the door, they quickly opened the door to see what kind of car he had. He had no car, and he disappeared in front of them. So I think you have the original phenomena is these are beings that intentionally or otherwise have been invoked, and they manifest. And then you have the government copies, the disinformation people that, for whatever reason, and I'll be glad to give you what I think is the original reason. I have no idea what they're telling themselves now. But there are less cases now of that particular variety. More Mothmen, less Men in Black. Before it was more Men in Black, less Mothmen. So I don't think, CIA agents are putting on wings and flapping around and scaring people with glowing red eyes. I think they're an anomalous phenomena in and of themselves. I think there were enough spontaneous cases of these beings in dark clothing, let's use that as a generic term, that somewhere in the bowels of government agencies, they decided, look, this can cause us all sorts of rumor problems and misidentifications and paranoia in society. In short, the world we live in now. So let's preempt this by doing some really, really silly stuff. Let's dress up in black outfits and go keep up with where there's been a UFO event or whatever, and we'll go to their house and we'll scare the bejesus out of them. Then we'll drive off in our big black Cadillac, and we're right there in the legend. There was the X-Files episode that got very close to what I think the truth of that kind of case is, where Jesse Ventura and Alex Trebek were the two men in black, because the witness said, well, one of them looked like Jesse Ventura and the other one looked like Alex Trebek. And it was actually played by Jesse Ventura and Alex Trebek. It was one of their more hilarious episodes. Yeah, they definitely had a sense of humor, rumor, and reality. So,
yeah, that sounds like a reasonable explanation there. Now, for the last few minutes that we have, I want to talk, we mentioned it a few times, about Hellier. I thought it was really one of the best docuseries that I've ever seen. Some of the synchronicities, the trails that they follow, I've never seen anything like it, and I've never seen the twists and turns that this investigation has taken. Now, I'd like you to talk about the importance of synchronicities whenever it comes to exploring occult and ufology and events like these, because I've noticed in my own life, since I started exploring this phenomenon, synchronicities have exponentially increased, and I notice them all the time now. So talk a little bit about that, and what are synchronicities?
Okay, let me back up and say something about Hellier specifically. They follow the synchronicities that occur along the way, along the path, the road. And they will make, if the synchronicity points them to the left, they'll go left. If the synchronicity points them to the right, they'll go right. If the synchronicity says stay in place, they stay in place. In other words, they follow the phenomenon. I think magical initiation attempts to reproduce that under comparatively controlled conditions, where there are surprises. For example, in the Masonic third degree, there's a point at which traditionally, I don't know if they're still doing this, but traditionally they pretend that the initiation is over and everybody congratulates the candidate, and then suddenly he's accosted by three ruffians who push him over backwards, but meanwhile the other members of the initiated members of the lodge are behind him with a blanket and catch him, but he feels like he's falling to the floor. And it's that gotcha moment, the Zen moment of the whole thing, that is supposed to propel you to a higher level, or whatever the design is. That's the principle involved in all initiations that work, which is crisis and resolution. The baby is born, the birth is difficult, but once the baby is born, you have a new life in the world. That's the oldest initiation we know of. And I was going somewhere with that, but I just had a senior moment.
We're talking about synchronicities and Hellier.
Okay, Hellier is the first thing I've seen in the television universe. There are all these programs on the Histrionic channel and on the Science channel and other channels that I've been on a good number of those programs. Of course, I said something in print about them, and I haven't been invited back for some odd reason. I don't know. But I remember I have a son that's a screenwriter, this is a tough year for screenwriters because there are no movies being made. They were 2 days from production on his current movie, and it still hasn't happened, but the writer gets paid in advance. Oops, I'm not going to mention his name because the IRS might be. That's forbidden knowledge. So he, for a while, as screenwriters will, he lived in Hollywood, then he lived in New York for a while. And I was called to New York by, what's it called? Brad Meltzer's Decoded. Now, they were paying for this, so they paid for my trip, paid for my hotel, paid me some little stipend. and told me to come out to Liberty Island where they were going to ask me about the secret Masonic basis of the Statue of Liberty. And I thought, okay, it's a decent subject. Let's go with it. I think it's their first or their second episode of this program, so I will try to do well by it. It was so rehearsed, so selective, and they interviewed me for maybe an hour, hour and a half, I don't know, these three people who were new at it, in fairness. And they got around, I think, to the question that they wanted me to answer in a certain way. They said, well, if this was built by Masons and it's a Masonic statue, should it be torn down? And I said, no, absolutely not. Read Emma Lazarus's poem on the base of this. Generations of people, including my ancestors, came over here and saw this as a beacon of liberty. I don't care what the people who designed it meant for it to be, whether it's a statue of a goddess or whatever. It represents the ideals of freedom now. And I went on and I thought, I'm so eloquent. I sound like I'm a flag waver, which I'm not, but it just, you know, I could hear the Battle Hymn of the Republic playing in the background as I was, and they cut that out, and they cut from my interview to a guy who said, yeah, tear it down, some angry New York conspiracy theorist. And I thought, yeah. And then we concluded the interview, so I was ready to leave. Next ferry out, they said, you've got to greet us. I said, pardon, I've already met you, you're nice people. Give me my $50 or whatever it was. I got to go see my son and daughter-in-law. So, no, when the ferry comes in, here's your mark. My mark? When did I become a member of AFTRA SAG? You know, I mean, I'm not an actor. Okay, you'll walk from the boat as if you're getting off. You'll go to your mark. You'll see the crew, and then you'll go up to them and go, ah! And I thought, am I going to do this? I feel raped, and that's the right term. Am I going to do it? Sure, I'll do it. They'll probably never run this on the show. They did. And they're all like that. One time, UFO hunters took me out. I'm going the long way around, but trust me on this. UFO hunters took me out in the middle of Utah. And again, they treated me really, really nicely. But they go out to somewhere out in the desert, and I'm supposed to hand the three people, Lincoln and Buckley, or whatever their names are, these photos. And they're just sheets of paper, and they're supposed to look at the photos. So we're out in the middle, and I see these two vans drive up, and the drivers get out of them, and the crew is across the street. And I said, okay, what do I do? They said, well, what we want you to do is to drive up to the crew, get out of the van, shake hands, introduce yourself, which I already, you know, we were in the same hotel for 2 days, so we're eating dinner together. Introduce yourself to the crew and show them the pictures. And I said, there's two problems with that. Number one, I don't have a driver's license. Number two, that's because I don't drive. Conference time. So I'm standing there. Does this sound as ridiculous as it is? I'm standing there thinking, what are they going to tell me to do? So I volunteered. I said, you know, I do know how to turn a car on. I could get in, turn it on, and turn it off, and get out and walk up to them and pretend that we're just meeting. And that's what we did, folks. That's what we did. It's still probably on YouTube somewhere. So, you know, if you ever see it, well, Hellier broke the mold. Okay, you've got a lot of people who do these little, you know, but they miss the point. I have done many real-time field investigations of UFO, of ghost phenomena, of this whole range of things. I've never seen Bigfoot, but I'm in the league, and I know what it's like. And I know sometimes it rains on you, and sometimes nothing happens, and sometimes this and sometimes that. Hellier is the real deal. This is the way field investigations go if you have a good team of investigators, not the ones that go, "Oh, we're not getting what we expected. We're going home." No, they follow the synchronicities, and it takes them in all these unexpected directions. And you begin to realize, hey, this is real life. I'm sure they cut out some of the boring stuff, but the production values, everyone says, even their critics, are outstanding. I can't believe they're working with, handheld equipment. And these people give me hope for the future of research, because they're open to almost anything. And it seems like the secret chiefs or whatever are throwing anything at them, whether it's balloons that say happy birthday, or, there was the one that I thought, I seem to be involved in this, because they interviewed me for a great, and I said, you need to regard those balloons more seriously, because they're saying they're happy birthday balloons, which you're not likely to find out in the middle of nowhere. They're saying, here's the gift, look around for the gift. And they go, they're polite, very polite people. So they didn't say anything back to me, but they leave Atlanta, and on the spur of the moment, I guess, they decide to go to this little town in Kentucky that I don't recall what the name of the town is, and it probably doesn't matter, but it's got a lot of occult, weird stuff in it. But I think I said to them before they left, if you don't pay attention to the signs, there will be a barrier in your path. Anybody who has access to Hellier, which is on YouTube, and I think it's still up on Amazon Prime. I said that as a throwaway comment, and also as an admonition, that I think that you need to take these seriously. Turns out they thought it was kind of boring or something, until they ran into a tree across their road, a barrier, and at the base of the tree was another balloon. And it was a blue star balloon, and we had been talking about Sirius, the largest blue star in the sky, in fact, the largest star in the sky, from, appearance from Earth. And unknown to them at the time was that one of my publishers is Blue Star Press. Not the ones that the Paranoia Press does Secret Cipher, but Blue Star Press does my current, not as popular, God Never Does the Same Thing Twice, because apparently it's taken as a religion book, which is not exactly what it is. It's more metaphorical. But that's a quote from an 18th century rabbi that I used as the title. I think of retitling it, Crazy Stuff. It'll sell 1 million. Crazy Stuff by Alan Greenfield. Yeah, Greenfield's good at the crazy stuff. Yeah, okay. But so it's a blue star balloon. Blue Star in Press is my publisher, and they're talking about that in the car, the whole thing, including how annoyed they were with me to keep mentioning balloons. And a couple of weeks ago, I don't think he would mind my saying this, but my current publisher of Secret Cipher is seeing balloons in remote areas, same kind of balloons, these mylar helium balloons that you might see one on a city street that got away from a kid or whatever. But how likely is it that you're going to have multiple instances of seeing these helium, and UFOs are often described as being weightless, and sometimes abductees say when they turn the beam on me, or I'm being drawn up, which is exactly what helium balloons do. So, just saying, they're in the zone. And what you're experiencing is, the insight I had was, since they're doing a good faith investigation and doing it well, it itself is a ritual. And if you are watching it, and I got this idea from my friend in England, Amadali, who is a trance dancer, and who says, my dances, if you watch them, you become a co-participant in the ritual. And I thought, yeah, what else does this apply to? And Hellier is it, because I keep getting reports from people, including myself. I don't like to include myself in the story. If I had a really, really abduction experience or anything, I'd probably leave it in my diary, but I wouldn't say it in my lifetime, because that becomes questionable for someone who's been an investigator for 50, 60 years, however long it's been. Long, strange trip it's been. I don't want to inject myself into the story the way good journalists don't want to inject themselves into stories that they're covering, which is sometimes very hard to do. And I have, by the way, I have not had any such experience. I've had a couple of ghostly encounters of the minimal kind, and that's about it. So I think that what you're experiencing, and what probably a lot of your, should I say watchers or listeners?
Both.
A lot of your watchers, but very few of your listeners. No, a lot of your listeners, but very few of, but everyone who has read my book, The Complete Secret Cipher, the Euphenots, is going to have these, no, I can't say that. I'm ashamed of myself. But you know what I'm saying. If you watch Hellier all the way through, and you really need to do it that way, you need to binge watch it if you didn't see it in sequence. Season 1, then season 2, all the way through. You can do that in 2 days, 2 nights, whatever. Skip work. Can't go to work anyway. It's a pandemic out there. You will probably experience a surplus of synchronicities. And I've only had that happen in one other arena in my life. I have synchronicities. Everybody does. And some people, they're rare enough, they'll write them off as coincidences, which, by the way, I don't think there is any such thing. I think there are. I think synchronicities are a clue to the type of universe or universes that I was talking about earlier. My feeling is that anybody that experiences these synchronicities repeatedly is part of the phenomena. And if you go with that, you become part of Hellier.
Very well said. I mean, would you think it's fair to say that if you're on a certain path and you're experiencing a number of synchronicities, that it's a way of the universe telling you you're on the right path?
Yep, exactly that. The way I expressed it was to use the magical terminology, which isn't the be-all and end-all, but it will do. The secret chiefs are guiding you. That doesn't mean Bill, the guy who told me that the occult is more important than grits on a hot summer day. Whatever his point was. Yeah, it's more respectable than flying saucers, something that I thought was ridiculous at the time and still think. Yeah, I mean, that pretty well nails it.
Very good. Alan, thank you so much. That was awesome information, and we barely even scratched the surface. So I'm definitely going to have you back on soon.
Hey, as long as I'm sitting up here with very little to do other than after midnight, I go out and ride my bicycle so that people in the lobby don't say, "Oh, it's the bicycle guy. Let's go talk to the bicycle guy." So.
Awesome. All right, Alan, you have a wonderful night. Thank you so much again. And before you head out, if people are interested in reading Secret Cipher and in any of your other books, what's the best place to find them?
the best thing to do is either to buy it directly from Paranoia Publishing, which you can Google their address. There's also a secret cipher decoder. There's a book coming that helps with decoding the cipher. And if you want me, let me spell my name, because if you spell it, I've been on the internet since it was the ARPANET. So there are many, 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 many entries, including my recently refurbished, excellent, old-fashioned website. Just Google the name Allen, A-L-L-E-N, Greenfield, Greenfield, and follow the signs. Most of them are nice. Some of them are mean and wrong. By the way, the Facebook link won't work because I have been one of many people who has been chopped from the block of Facebook for reasons unknown. However, I don't blame anybody because I don't think there's anybody of the humankind at home. And I don't mean that in any alien way. I mean, it's all being done by machine. I put in the wrong password and I'm blocked for life.
Oh, I know that's happened to quite a few people I know.
Lately, especially because it's trouble. So we're running overtime. You have that overtime host look. So thank you for having me, and I'll be glad to be back on anytime you really need me and I'm still alive.
Definitely. All right, Ellen.
On the radio thing, the spirit box.
Awesome. Alan, thank you again, and we will talk to you again soon. Have a good night.
You too.